Ryan Fitzgerald at Ryan_physique on Instagram. I was in the military. I was an Army veteran. I'm an Army veteran. I enlisted in 2012, right out of high school. I graduated in 11, and then it took me some time, but I ended up getting in February of the following year, which is kind of where my whole fitness journey started. I was always kind of a leaner, skinnier kid. Always kind of wanted to build on that, and being in the military, you know, they're constantly feeding you, you're constantly, you know, training and doing all that stuff. So when I did my basic training in Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I went to Missouri after that, and all the stories I heard about Missouri was you're going to be miserable, you're going to hate it, you know, Fort Leonard Wood, it all had these stories, right? Every base kind of has their story. And when I got there, my battle at the time, a buddy of mine, kind of introduced me to the gym, introduced me to training. And I was like, oh man, this sucks, dude. Like, I'll never forget it. The story I always tell people, I laid on an incline bench for the first time with 25s on each side, and I couldn't even get it off. And that was like the trigger. Was like, oh, all right, well, now I'm challenged. Now I feel like I have something to prove. So I enlisted, and I was probably like 134 or 135 pounds. When I got, you know, through this process, it was, you know, whatever, 10 weeks of basic training. And then a couple months I was in Missouri. I ended up coming out at like 145, 146, just like kind of being structured, knowing the importance of water, knowing the importance of nutrition. It was kind of my first introduction to supplementation and, you know, even like multivitamins. Like I was only 19, 20 years old. I didn't know any better. So I started on all that. And then when I got home, the first thing I did was I hit up a buddy of mine who lived up the road. And I was like, hey man, like I'm coming to the gym with you. Like we need to start, you know, this journey, so to speak. And dude, the rest is history.
So was the push a lot from the military, from the side of like the supplements and the training and all that kind of stuff? Or was it more from like people that were kind of in your class with you?
It was a combination of things. It was obviously, hey, these guys are big dudes. Like I grew up a wrestling fan, like WWF, WWE, WCW, like those guys were larger than life. So I was like, man, like that it would be cool to look like that. I was a fan of those physiques before I ever was introduced to the IFBB and the bodybuilding world that it is today. And I was like, man, those are the guys I want to look like. And in the military, that's when some of these guys were like, hey, you know, this guy just won the Olympia, or this guy just won, you know, the New York Pro, or this guy won the Arnold Classic. And I'm like, okay, well, there's more to this. And when I came home, you know, my dad was a big book guy and magazines and stuff, gun magazine, horse magazines. And I would go to Barnes and Noble with him, and I would look like through the muscle and fitness magazines, and I would look through the flex magazines, and I'm like, oh, these guys put those guys on TV to shame. So the guys in the service really pushed me from like like, hey, that's an obtainable physique for me. I could do that. But then that next level was like, okay, like my heroes, so to speak, and the guys that I admired, you know, on paper, I was like, okay, that's obviously the end goal, but these guys are going to push me to kind of that next limit. And then someone else will push me to the next limit, and so on and so forth. So it was a combination of a structured life that I think a lot of people enlist in the military for. And then, hey, these guys around me are definitely, you know, they're my brothers and sisters, and they're going to help me kind of get to that next level.
So what pushed you to the military? Was it like a family thing, or was it something new, just a new experience for you?
It was a structure thing. You know, I don't think I was a bad kid. I wasn't in a lot of trouble. My family didn't struggle or anything. Like I'm very blessed. I didn't really have one of those typical military stories. For me, it sounds very cliche, but I just kind of felt like, hey, I want to do more. Like I want a purpose. I want this structure in my life. What steps can I take to kind of pave the road for me in the future? You know, I didn't love school. I wasn't a great student. College was an afterthought. You know, apologize my language, but like I was kind of fucked. Like I was like, I have nowhere to go from here. So like I'm graduating high school, and there's this big wall that was in my high school, and every year the graduating class would have, you know, these papers all over the wall, and it would be like, you know, Joe Smith, Kentucky University, Diane, whatever, USC. And then it's like, I don't even think my name was up there because I just didn't have, and like that killed me. Cause I'm like, man, like, are my parents proud of me? Because I'm not proud of me. Like, how do you have those conversations with people? And a teacher would say like, hey, like, what's next? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm happy that I'm graduating on time, to be honest. Like, I'm just happy I didn't get thrown out of school for fighting or skipping or whatever the case may be. So I wasn't a bad kid, but I just needed something that was going to kind of open doors for me, something I could put on a resume really. And then it was a pride thing. It was like, hey, like, this is going to make me feel better about myself. And, what can I do with that? So, I wanted to serve my country really bad. I wanted to do more. I wanted to be more. I guess for a lot of kids, when you're first enlisting, you kind of have this like Rambo mentality. Like, they're going to make movies about me one day. And maybe that was just my point of view. It's a really shitty point of view, honestly. But that was really it. I was like, man, I'm a nobody right now. Like, how can I prove to myself and to the people around me that I'm not a loser? And I guess that's kind of stuck with me for years. And that's kind of why I continue to bodybuild and continue to compete. And I just feel like I constantly have this chip on my shoulder that I need to prove something.
We might see ourselves in the mirror and in our own head so much differently than the world sees us. It doesn't matter sometimes how much we accomplish. You kind of mentioned that chip on your shoulder. It's like we're constantly looking to please our childhood selves in a way. Like, what issues or what kind of like things did I not feel in my past, and how can I like constantly get there and feel the, fulfillment of what I wish I would have had then. It's so interesting too, how like the pride aspect comes into it, because I feel like when you're in high school and you have basically most kids have no idea what they want to do when they quote unquote grow up. It's like, well, what do I find interesting? What do my parents maybe want me to do? What's my friend group doing? Maybe I'll just go along with that for a while, see what happens. I feel like the military is really this opportunity for you to kind of discover more about yourself, grow up a little bit, really just figure things out. Did you kind of feel like you figured things out a little bit in that period?
I think it gave me direction, and I was like, okay, now I'm not, that kid who doesn't think about the next step, or, hey, I was a very like, oh, when I get there, when I get there, I'll cross that bridge when I get there. If there was, financial trouble in my life, a bill had to be paid, I had a deadline for something, I was like, I'll worry about it the night before, right? Kind of that high school mentality where, hey, you know what, I'll write that paper the night before, I'll get to it. That definitely changed with the service. It definitely made me feel like, hey, I'm way more goal oriented now. I'm definitely passionate about, especially fitness, like health and fitness and I know it might not sound ideal, but was probably my biggest takeaway from the service. When I first enlisted, I just wanted to fight. And I don't know why, but like, I felt like, okay, I'm enlisting. If the military can check these boxes for me, like I want to deploy. I don't want to feel like I wasted my time or anybody else's time. My cousin was in the service. He was a Marine. He was like stationed in Hawaii. And I'm like, man, like that must be the life, obviously, it wasn't for him, when the time was up, he got out. But I remember when I first enlisted, I was like, man, I could do this for the rest of my life. Like, I'll just have these people pushing me forever and I'll never have to worry about myself, So, I just definitely needed kind of that kick in the ass. And the biggest takeaway was like, okay, like if I hold on to anything, it has to be my motivation.
Did it feel like it was almost like a second world? Like it feels like you have, like, if you have an issue in this world, like it's okay to have issues. It's okay to like not fix yourself. It's okay to just be who you are because you're good, like as you are. And in certain ways, obviously that's true, but like the military, it seems like it's all about kind of breaking you down and to build you back up better. Did you feel like that was true in your scenario as well?
Wow, that is a very good question. Yeah, it was definitely, it was weird to see, like, at home things were changing. Obviously, we're talking, 2012 through even like 2018, really, and like you said, the world was changing. Things were becoming more accepted, and there was less hate, so to speak, and that's a good thing. Everything was becoming a little more sensitive, I guess, so to speak. Not in a bad way. And then for the military, that just didn't change. That was never the case. It really was like, hey, you are, especially basic training, because that's kind of the area that, when you say break you down and kind of build you back up, that's what basic training is for. It's to make you feel like nothing. And like you're just this blob of clay now, and these people are going to mold you into what you're going to be. And that really was the case. So like, yeah, things were changing outside. And, there were different things, policies and guidelines and stuff that may change. A good example is, you always have to go somewhere with a battle buddy. That was like, hey, you can't even go to, the restroom or the latrine without somebody going with you. There was a lot of, hey, no two guys to one female or something like that. And, whatever, things were going on in the real world that would, correlate to that. But yeah, it was nothing was really changing as fast as it was in the real world, in the military.
And when you got, when you got out of that experience, that kind of initial break you down, build you back up, looking back at it, do you have any kind of like wow moments?
Yeah, I think the fitness aspect really, we were so, when I was in Missouri, our days were very structured and everything was kind of lined up for us. And then at the end of the day, you're like, man, like I'm not just leaving my 9 to 5. I can't just go home. I can't go play video games or lay on the couch. So I was like, man, like, I guess I'll go to the gym with these guys. I mean, they know what they're doing. Maybe I can learn a thing or two. And I never thought anything would come of it other than like, hey, I just want to get a little bigger. I want to kind of look like my buddies. I want to fit in. I want to be a tough guy. It was more or less like, hey, I'm going to go crazy if I'm just sitting in my room, basically from 6 o'clock at night until, 6 a.m. the next morning or 5:30 the next morning. So, I started getting into lifting and I was like, wow, like, okay, I need to do this every day now, when we didn't really know anything. And I was like, when I got out, I really wanted to keep my life structured in a sense, not to kind of beat a dead horse with that word, but I was like, man, like I should keep getting up at 6 a.m. I should keep, eating this, the same meals, 4 or 5 times a day. I got to keep, this, I got to keep determined. I got to stay motivated. I should keep going to the gym. And, obviously over time, some of those things fade. I'm definitely not getting up at 6 a.m. every day, and stuff like that. But, I'm still in the gym, and I'm like very proud of that. Like my motivation that, those guys and girls gave me and leadership gave me that, I still think back to people, my drill sergeant Hicks, and that guy was like my biggest motivation. I was like, man, like they should make movies about this guy. He is a badass. And, you always kind of have like that little, like your mentors in life, in every walk of life, everybody has a mentor. And you just kind of think like, okay, like if that person was in my ear right now, what would they be telling me to do? And I definitely carried that, not one particular experience, but just the opportunities that I saw. I was like, man, like I got to keep this going. I can't quit on this.
And do you think that that's common, or do you think it's more common to, once somebody does kind of get away from that environment, that they kind of just like go crazy, break loose, and they're like no structure? Do they flip more, or do they kind of stay on that track a little bit more, do you think?
I can only say from experience, and my group of friends, when we all graduated high school, we all actually enlisted. There was about a group of like 6 or 7 of us, and I think only one of my buddies ended up going right to college. So just from experience, and I don't want to speak, for the masses, but it's kind of 50-50. I know for the people that got in kind of similar to me, that needed the structure and the kind of the discipline, ended up staying in. And I think for some people, they were like, man, this is the worst experience of my life. And they get out and they crash, man. Issues with relationships, issues with jobs, whatever the case may be. I can't speak to one particular scenario or the other, but it's definitely 50-50, man. You hate to see it. But some people get out and they hold on to that, time of their lives, and they look at it as, hey, this was a great opportunity. I'm glad that I did this. I feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, and I want to kind of carry that momentum, similar to my story, I believe. But there are people who look at it almost as a prison sentence. And I hate to use that terminology, but I feel a lot of people will agree, especially those who struggled, cannot wait to get out. Or you have those guys and girls who just constantly want to deploy and get away from, you kind of talked about those two different worlds. They just have nothing to come home to or don't want to come back and constantly looking to deploy and volunteer for deployments. And even that's like, man, that can't be healthy. Like, you need a balance in your life. I think now, granted, there are things going on in the world, but we're kind of out of that wartime for our country. And I think actually a lot of people struggle with that, with the fact that they're in the service now with no kind of end goal. I'm very goal oriented, and without kind of that light at the end of the tunnel, I do feel a little lost. And, these guys and girls that aren't deploying, I think feel the same way, just from conversations I've had with, some of these battles that are still in. Man, it sucks to see, but it's definitely still, I think, 50-50.
Do you think that there's like maybe some type of very human thing about fighting that is unlocked whenever you are in that environment? Do you think that there's, even if you're not, in the act of fighting, just preparing to fight and knowing that it's a possibility, do you think that like brings something out that is like caged up inside other people who don't get that experience?
Yeah. I personally never deployed overseas. I was military police corrections. I did a couple trips over to Leavenworth in Kansas. I've never had the experience that some of, my brothers and sisters have. But yeah, there's a trigger, man. You're in this environment, even like walking into that prison. For me, like, you just feel like there's almost like this aura, and you're like, just, I don't want to say constantly on edge of stuff, but you almost have to be. I can't speak for, for those, family members or friends that have gone overseas and have, really seen some shit. But for me, it was just like, okay, like, one day you're training with your buddies, a great example. There's this exercise you do where, you kick down the prison door with like 5 of your buddies, and you go in and you got, one sergeant dressed up in, the hockey gear, and you're just having fun. You're just beating the shit out of each other and slamming each other against the walls. And then you're in a prison where, like, okay, this could really happen, but everybody in here could kill me. And that's a very uneasy feeling that, you don't, I wouldn't, at the time was, my girlfriend, now my wife, I wouldn't really share those stories, because it's just like, not that it would, screw me up or that it would, anything like that. It's just like, hey, I don't really think that you would fully understand what that feeling is. And maybe even some other people in the service who have never experienced, are like, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. But it's just a very weird feeling. And I know for friends and family who have gone overseas and fought, it's like, hey man, there are some down days and there are some cool days, but you're also constantly carrying around your M4 because somebody's shooting at you. Or, you're driving down, you're in country and you're driving in a convoy, and all of a sudden, your Humvee gets, you hear pop, pop, pop. And they're like, nah, just keep driving. I'm like, man, that has got to be a wild adrenaline rush. And then you don't even react sometimes, and that is like just a weird, you got to flip that switch, man. It's weird.
Do you think that like people, let's just say use America, for instance, because obviously we both have this experience. You think people in America who don't have that kind of experience, or kind of like an experience in their, even in just a non-military life where it's not life or death all the time, do you think that we've almost blown out of proportion and like lost a lot of perspective on just day-to-day things? My coffee's too hot or my coffee's too cold. Do you think that we're out of touch with like reality because we have it, the way we have it, and we fear so much that we can't even almost enjoy the good that we do have a lot of times?
100%. I do it all the time. From personal experience, like, there was a time where we took a convoy from Pennsylvania up to Wisconsin. It was a 3-day convoy, and it was, yearly training exercise. We get all the way up there, 3 days of driving in the truck. It's, I don't know. We got there like 11 o'clock at night. They didn't have any place for us to sleep. So we popped open our cots. It was like late July, middle of Wisconsin. We're sleeping on cots under the stars. We had nowhere to sleep. It starts to rain a little bit, and you're like, man, this might be the worst experience of my life. It was awful. It was cold. We were wet. And then, you fall asleep at midnight just to wake up at 5 a.m. Now I lay in bed and I'm like, man, these covers suck. Or I'm like, oh man, I gotta make the bed in the morning. Are you kidding me? You definitely take advantage, or you definitely, what's the word I'm looking for? You definitely take for granted some of the little things, like food. It's so silly, right? Like, you're just be happy to eat. But like for me, yeah, like you said, my coffee's too hot, my coffee's too cold, or this didn't work out for me. And I think a lot of people who haven't had those experiences definitely don't really know what the suck is really like. And I'm not saying I've ever experienced the worst of the worst, but I've had those experiences where I can say, like, there are worse things, than what I'm experiencing right now, or so on and so forth.
Do you think the gym is kind of like a place for you to go and almost be trained mentally as well to kind of keep up your mental toughness in a way?
Yeah, 100%. I compete because of that mindset that I had in the service. I love to work out, so needing that light at the end of the tunnel is how I got into physically competing and getting on stage. And that's the only time, again, because you're a little more wound up. Your life is then again structured. You're on a schedule. You do have the cardio, like you had your PT in the morning. You do work out. You have your like. That's the only thing I can correlate to those experiences. And when I'm in the gym, I'm like, hey, this is work. Like, I may be tired. My diet may be taking its toll on me. I may be losing weight, but this goal at the end of the tunnel, man, like, I need to be right up here before anything. And like, you're just constantly during, a 14, 16, 20 week bodybuilding prep, like, man, I'm fucking grinding every day. And I think my time in the service has really helped me with that. If I was coming out of high school, I hated organized sports. Obviously bodybuilding is a very, selfish sport, but, I remember my senior year, I wasn't starting. I was played safety and I wasn't starting. And I remember just walking off of the field to practice one day, going into the locker room, and I never went back. I could never do that today because of the military, because of that mental toughness that it's distilled in me. So I go to the gym and I'm like, man, don't quit. Like, what it's like to quit, and you hate it. You hate that time when you have to look at yourself in the mirror after you shower, or when you're making your food, or whatever the case may be. And you're like, man, like, kind of like we talked about earlier, like, if I quit right now, I'm going to disappoint myself. I'm going to disappoint my loved ones. What are my parents going to think? What are my friends going to think? What are my military, brothers and sisters going to think? Like, you almost have like this standard that you give yourself when you're in the bodybuilding world, because maybe that's all you display on social media, or maybe that is, your topic of conversation, like we're doing now. And I'm like, man, the military is the reason that I cannot quit on this, because it's like imprinted on my brain. Like, what it's like to quit. That is no longer a part of your vocabulary. They broke me down, and when they built me up, they took that out. And so, yeah, the mental toughness, man, being in the gym, I still hear those voices that are like, hey, what it's like. Don't do that again.
What do you think that you would have done to maybe get that pride aspect into your life if it wasn't for, right now, if it wasn't for the lifting weights and bodybuilding and things like that? Do you have something else where it's like, this is my, alternate path kind of thing?
No, I don't have anything. I didn't like going to work. I didn't like getting up in the morning. I didn't like doing schoolwork. I like nothing. And by nothing, I just mean I was lazy. It's not that I was, I cannot pinpoint one thing that could have changed my life. And that's why I did what I did. I was going nowhere fast. And, bodybuilding wasn't even a part of my life at the time. So who knows if I would have even discovered it, or have made that a part of my life to kind of take those traits that I learned in the service and continue to utilize them. You know, I tell everybody, for example, somebody comes to me for advice and I go, hey, this is just tools for the toolbox. You know, let me share some tools with you. Use them, don't use them, but just store them. And that's kind of stemmed from my time in the service. Hey, I gained tools for my toolbox, and I don't always have to use them, but I cannot get rid of them. And I don't think that, not to keep, you know, using that analogy, but I don't think my toolbox would be full if it wasn't for my time in the service. I had nothing, man. I had about $50 in my bank account. My car was breaking down every week. I'm pretty sure I was working like a part-time job gig at like a gym. I'm pretty sure at the time, you know, we're talking 10 years ago now. Yeah, I cannot say, without the military, I don't know where I'd be. I don't want to be cliche and say I'd be in prison or something like that. Again, I wasn't a bad dude. You know, I wasn't struggling really, other than financially, but I don't know. I really don't.
What do you think the future of bodybuilding holds? How much, how deep is the commitment and the grind for you?
100%. It's all in. I need positive criticism in my life, and I need structure, and I need that light at the end of the tunnel. You know, my wife helps me out a lot. My family helps me out a lot, but I kind of need those self goals. You know, trying to put it into perspective, we've all quit something at some point in our lives. You know, and I go back to, you know, high school and organized sports. You know, I quit so much, and it was always like, man, like, yeah, it was temporary at the time and I got over it. And, you know, I got to party and the girls and, you know, hang out with my friends and stuff, and all that stuff was fun. But like, look at it. You know, we're 12 years later now or something, or 11 years later. I'm still talking about that time I quit high school football. You know, so why, if I do get into it, you know, I got into the military, and there were times, man, you know, they wake you up at 5 a.m. and I'm like, man, maybe I should just go home. Like, maybe I should just fight this and get out of here. No, I'll regret that for the rest of my life. If I regret quitting my high school football team, how, you know, this will weigh on me for life. And then the same thing comes into play when I'm getting ready for a prep. Listen, my wife is in phenomenal shape, and she lives the lifestyle and she diets, but she doesn't get the competition aspect. You know, she's like, you hate it, you're crazy, you know, you're disconnected and blah blah. It's, you know, very selfish, and I get that, but I'm like, yeah, but I've done this already. Like, I've put people through way worse. Like, you know, give me these next 3 months. And so it is tough getting into that lifestyle and kind of just pulling myself away from the world. But, you know, I did that in the military. I pulled myself away from everything, from my loved ones, from my friends. And I'm like, hey, I have to do this for me right now. And I think the same thing comes into play with the service. And like you said, you know, we've gotten into a place where it's okay to say, hey, I quit, you know, and people will put their arms around you and tell you it's okay. And, you know, hey, on to the next. But I cannot shake the feeling of guilt and almost depression from, you know, falling into a deep state of depression from like, man, like, okay, life's not really going the way I want it to. Like, what can I do better? Or what can I change right now to pick myself back up? And I know that sounds so crazy, because being in a bodybuilding competition can be, like you said, a struggle. But I need something that's going to make me not want to quit, because it's so easy to not get out of bed when your alarm goes off. It's so easy to not want to do your morning cardio when, you know, I don't really need it right now. I'm not in prep. You know, I don't want to do it. You know, usually you take your dog for a 20-minute walk. 10 minutes is good enough today. But then that weighs on me all day long. You know, I should have gone 10 more fucking minutes. You know, I should have just got out of bed when my alarm went off at 7:30. And I think a lot of people, like you said, are okay with hitting the snooze button. And for those of us who take it to the next level, and I feel confident enough to say that, and I'm not blowing smoke or patting myself on the back, I don't do that. I'm done hitting the snooze button.
You know, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate, you know, your time, and also appreciate your service. It's really cool to get to talk to you.
Thanks, Danny, man. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Like I said earlier, you know, maybe before we started recording, is any chance you get to share your message and kind of share where you're at. You'd be surprised at how many people are going through the same shit that you are, going through the same things that you are, and kind of have similar experiences. I'm sure there's other people out there whose military experiences may not have lived up to the expectation, and they've struggled in other aspects of their life because of it. Or, you know, bodybuilding has become an outlet for a veteran, or, you know, somebody who's gone through some struggles. I hope that my story or my message here today can you know, translate with somebody, and I hope bodybuilding can become an outlet for those who are struggling or just exercising in general. It helped me. It has become a 60-40 in my life. 60% of the time I am entirely focused on bodybuilding. 40%, of course, is, you know, my family and my friends and going out and having a couple drinks and grabbing dinner. It's okay to have that balance. Find your outlet, find something that's going to motivate you. You know, if it is jumping into a bodybuilding prep just to see how you can do it. And just, you know, find the outlet, you know, so to speak. Stay motivated, stay hungry, find that light at the end of the tunnel. Find those tools for the toolbox that are going to help you, you know, not hit the snooze button the next day.